Anyways, welcome back to the Fulfilling Destiny podcast. I am your host, Jan-Marini Pacleb, and today we are with Shawn Khalifa, who are already been with us before. Man, my days almost. I believe it was last 2 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
um, which is pretty funny because today is the day we drop the episode with you
Oh,
and Laura and Raquel.
that's
So
exciting. Yeah, really looking forward to that.
yeah, I'm excited too. I'm just waiting for like the last flyer to come out. So that is something to see. So for the people who are watching now, if you haven't seen that episode yet, I highly encourage everyone to watch it because it talks about some very important things, like incarceration in general, incarceration as a woman, as a man, as a teenager, and all the intersectional difficulties of reintegrating back to society, and also continued poverty from those transitions, going into going out, then going back in, then going back out, and then you know it's a long-winded episode, but it's something to think about if you haven't already gotten a chance to talk to someone who's already been in the incarceration system or who have been just as impacted. That is something that needs to be brought to the table a little more. So since if I'm thinking of the timeline, we've already talked to another person who shared her story, Amber Miller, who has already shared her her vulnerable story about what it means to be in similar situations. But now we are transitioning to talk about incarceration as a young teen, a lifer. So it's a little bit like a, what's the right word? I forgot what it was. It's a stripped down version of an interview. Uh, and we're just gonna just have a conversation, which is basically what I do here anyways. So it's good to have you back, Shawn. I know
Thank
it's
you.
been a long week, so
Yeah, but nothing better than a long, productive week.
a very long, productive week. And you're up early. I got your message at like 4 in the morning. I'm like, I forgot.
Yeah, I was just so excited about this episode. I had it on my calendar all week. I was
Mm-hmm.
just looking forward to this day. So it's like Christmas morning when you wake up and you go to
Mhm.
unwrap your presents.
Although I have to say I'm so sorry I didn't send it sooner. Like when you sent me that message at 7 p.m. last night,
Yes.
I didn't wake up until 11 because I had just fallen asleep at 4 p.m. yesterday. So I'm just like it's been really bad.
You're still on Manila time,
Oh, most definitely.
not California time. Yeah.
Hmm. I'm just like, I have been talking to a lot of Filipino friends lately, so try to keep up with their time zones is
Yeah.
sometimes a nightmare for me. And so, but I love them to death. It's just sometimes I
Yeah.
get carried away and I can't
It's
stop myself.
hard. It's hard being out here in California. People think it's all sunshine and beaches, but it's different time zones and we get rain. You know, it rains sometimes here.
It did rain yesterday.
Yes, yes, facts.
It did rain yesterday. Because I thought I heard someone tapping my window, even though like
Oh, that would have been scary. Yeah,
yeah, but I was like, oh no, it's the rain. I'm fine.
just the rain. Yeah, the rain ain't never hurt nobody.
Mm, mm,
Well, sometimes, yeah, the rain has.
flooding. I
That's-
know that there's been some amount of flooding, especially in the freeway. So, well, I mean,
yeah, don't go to Mission Valley Mall and try to park in the parking structure. That turns into a pool every
I
rain,
know,
like every downpour.
I know, which is annoying, but that's just like my general gripe with the rain, San Diego. Not everyone knows how to drive through it, but
At all. It's the most dangerous. Nobody knows how to slow down. They don't. They still treat it like they're playing Zelda, and they're just running through the wild. Like it's cool to just run through the wild, but you need to pump the brakes sometimes. Hey, it's raining, and we're not in a Nintendo video game. This is
mm-hmm.
real life. This is more like PS5, and you get the feedback of the controller. It's intense. When it rains in San Diego and you're on the freeway, I've survived a bus crash on the rainy freeway.
Mm-hmm.
Destroyed my bike. I had my bike on the front, but luckily no one was hurt. That was the most important thing. No one was hurt, but
Yeah.
it's still trauma. You can't go on a San Diego freeway in the rain without seeing one or two accidents.
Mm-hmm. I know. So to everybody who lives currently in San Diego or California in general, experiencing some rainstorms, please do be careful when you drive. Be mindful of your speeds, and then it's okay to take the extra time.
Yeah,
Nothing is more important than getting into your destination in one piece,
at
right?
least 10 to 20 miles per hour slower than you normally would go because your
Mhm.
tires need the traction. You never know when you're going to hit. get away, and yeah.
Yeah. But I
Mindful,
mean,
mindfulness.
yeah. But I mean, I digress from that. So, just so well, I mean, there's no way to like transition it really because it's just all right.
Yeah, I mean, it was a rainy day when I was incarcerated.
Well, there you go. There's your opening.
Oh, on a rainy day back in 1992.
Oh gosh.
But I could go back. I always go back to my early childhood because I'm of the belief and position that it's not always a person's choice. A lot of influences that and choices people make, they're
Yep.
called choices. So you would think it's like literally a choice, but sometimes you have predetermined choices.
Hmm.
So you did cut out, but you're back. That's great. It's like if you take a test and you have four answers and you get to pick one. That's how I view a lot of children's childhoods because it's predetermined by your parents. What's your parents' socioeconomic status? Where do they live?
Hmm.
What opportunities exist in your community? Who's encouraging you? Who cares about that community and children from that community? And if I can, the knowledge I do have about my parents, my father, he's an Egyptian. I would love to say he's an Egyptian American, but he's never had citizenship. He came over on a visa when he was a teen. His parents lied about his age to get him on a ship, and what happened was he ended up being deported when he tried to get his actual citizenship,
Oh no.
along with his father, who was deported prior to him.
Hmm.
So he snuck back into the country because his mom was still here. And unfortunately, he went on to be deported 3 times. One of those times, though, he met my mother when he returned. He would always return through Mexico. Very intelligent, fluent in Spanish. He knew 7 different languages, so Spanish was one of them. He was able to navigate Latin America, get back to the United States. And when he met my mother, she's a white woman. She had an engineering job. She never graduated college, but she's been working since the age of 17. So she kind of worked her way up into a great engineering career. And when she met my father, they fell in love. They had my sister who's 5 years older than me, and then they were in their 40s. My mom was 41, my dad was 40, and she got pregnant, which tells me that I was an accident, but they'll never admit that I was an accident. They'll say I was God's gift to them in the world. But I mean, I was
Hmm.
born to older parents, and my father, by the time I was born, he was addicted to heroin.
Oh.
So he would tend to have my mom living in the most like high active drug areas in Los Angeles County. So they lived in a portion of Venice Beach where there was often homicides.
Hmm.
They moved to South Central, then they moved to West Adams. And ultimately, when I was going to preschool, we were living in an area of Los Angeles called the Jungles, which is part of Baldwin Hills, is down the hill in the apartment portion.
Hmm.
And in this neighborhood, Rodney King was just beaten a year prior to the events that kind of led my mom to flee. But I was a young child in preschool for the Rodney King riots, and I don't remember any of it because I was a child, but
Hmm.
I do have like a glimpse of going out the next day and seeing my mom's favorite store that she always went to was burned down. We
Uh-huh.
had an Asian neighbor who was shot by the National Guard. He was killed. He was new to the country, so he was out past curfew and they shot him. So
Hmm.
my mom took it upon herself to kind of flee after that, being a single white mother. My dad was in prison at this time. So she moved
Ah.
us to Riverside County, trying to get us out of that environment, hoping to get us into an environment without street gangs and drugs.
Hmm.
But she wasn't the only parent who had that in mind. So other parents also moved from Los Angeles.
Hmm.
So our new community in Paris, California, Riverside County, which is with traffic is about a 2-hour commute each way. She kept her job there. So during the week, she was always driving back and forth to LA, leaving at 5 in the morning, getting home at 5 at night. Um, so my mother would actually she left at 3 in the morning. We'll get home at 5 at night.
Hmm.
But my mother's intention of getting us away from danger just it didn't happen because a gang formed in my community in 1996 in my neighborhood, and that was the foundation of their gang. So they
Hmm.
functioned out of that block,
Hmm.
and it expanded beyond it. But that was like when you lived in that neighborhood, you had to fit in with the local gang, or you couldn't go outside and play. You'd
Hmm.
be picked on, or be bullies. There would be rival gangs targeting you, and it just helped and was healthy to have that connection with the local kids that
Hmm.
organized themselves into a group.
Hmm.
Um,
Your
so
mother
that was
was
my yeah.
your mother did what she needed to do, like try to get you out. It just
Yeah.
so happened that it followed, right? I'm assuming that's where it's going, right? It followed because of the
It definitely
expansion.
followed, and a lot of the Rodney King disturbances, and we always call it a riot. I still call it a riot, but it was a disturbance that was instigated by police, instigated violence. The
Mm-hmm.
same type of law enforcement presence in Los Angeles was in Riverside County already,
Mm-hmm.
and I like, in my opinion, they like to mimic Los Angeles. The local street gangs usually mimic Los Angeles culture, but law enforcement did as well. So, um, what transitioned to my community was a lot of people being incarcerated and a lot of crime. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, a lot of crime is just a factor of not enough support and resources. Unfortunately for me, my mother still worked in Los Angeles, and my father was in and out of prison, and he wasn't allowed to live at our home because he was
Right.
addicted to heroin, and my mother didn't want to lose the house.
Mm-hmm.
So when he would get home from prison, she would give him a 2 week window curfew to prove to her that he could be off of drugs and live there. But he never made that 2 week period. He would always fail, and she would have to kick him out again. And it would always be a dramatic scene. But so my father wasn't there. My mother was in Los Angeles. My sister's older than me, and she was put on a gang. She was put on. I don't want to call them a gang. I just called them a gang. But she joined the Mormon Church, which was quite
Yeah, I was
something.
about to say, it's
Yeah,
like, okay.
it's not a gang, but
It's a
um,
it's
that's
a,
how they view gangs. Some gangs aren't a gang. They're a group of people
they're
that
just a
have
group of
a
people
common
have a
bond.
mm-hmm.
So your Mormon organization, who has an entire state in our nation, I don't want to characterize them as cult gang and all of this,
Mm-hmm.
but you can make an argument for anything. But I would say that the Mormons, who have a lovely spirit, by the way, and choose the right is one of my favorite sayings that I've adopted from their church. Literally, they baptized me into their church when I was 8, but I didn't know what I was getting into. But when they courted my sister and they got her into the practices of their religion, um, we separated because my sister now had church and she's 5 years older and
She
she
had
wasn't
things
doing
to
drugs.
do and she
Yeah,
didn't want to be a part. Mm-hmm.
and I was still exploring drugs. I started smoking weed at 11, and I
So
tried weed prior to
young.
11. Yeah, I tried cocaine when I was about 8 years old because my friend's
Oh,
brother had some, and we didn't know how to snort it. So he was younger than me. He was probably about 6. I was 8, and we took a McDonald's straw and tried to snort it straight from the bag because
okay.
we weren't versed on drugs. All we knew
No.
is that we wanted to try it, and they were available. Um,
Mm-hmm. Like
that's scary.
childlike curiosity in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and we didn't have no one educating us on these dynamics. My mother did though. One time, one of the local guys who I grew up to be friends with, who was from the local neighborhood, he dropped a bag of weed in front of my house when I was younger
Mm-hmm.
than me. And I remember taking it to my mom and asking her, "What is this?" And she flushed it down the toilet and yelled at me and told me, "This is what you do whenever you see something like this. You flush it down the toilet."
Hide the
So
evidence.
she was doing her best. My mom was basically swimming to provide a better life for us. She had to keep her job in Los Angeles because all the jobs in the Inland Empire were low paying and couldn't
Mm-hmm.
afford her house payment. But literally, a 3 bedroom, 2 story tract home in Riverside County was the same. You paid the same monthly as you would for an apartment in the hood in Los Angeles. So she felt like it was a fair trade off. But in order to make those payments, she had to keep her higher paying job in Los Angeles.
Just yeah. She
Yeah,
she did her best to make those ends
she
meet.
she did her best, and I did my best to make it hard for her because Uh, the local school system didn't help us because at that time there was no thought put into. There was a lot of emphasis put on super predator children, and children are just bad and inherently bad. There was no talk of restorative justice. So when a child was bad at school, they were deemed literally these are
Just
bad
bad.
children. They need
Like
to
they
be
didn't
separated.
so like they didn't prod like extra questions like how can we
At
help
all,
support you? What
at
do you
all. Yeah.
need? Mm-hmm.
So I
Okay.
found myself banned from the playground from about second grade forward. And the teachers never asked what's going on at home. Were you being abused? Are you exposed to violence? None of this was addressed. It was more so you're talking when you're not supposed to, and you're acting out and being a goofball in class. But some of the reasons that led to that is my teacher in second grade, my friend in front of me, he threw him out of his chair physically. So my friend was pushing his friend out of the chair like repeatedly and just dying laughing, which was hilarious to the whole class. The teacher responded by shoving my friend out of the chair into the wall, which was like a violent assault on a child, which was child abuse. So going through this, the teacher might not have known how it affected me, but coming from a community of violence where not only was the Rodney King events like a norm, that was what I was born into, that type of violence where you even the police, I remember they broke out our car windows. So there was always like threats of violence, whether it's from law enforcement or home. Um, so I didn't have a stable, and you can't rationalize at that age anyway. You don't have a
No.
frontal lobe, your brain's
Mhm.
developing. So I couldn't rationalize a lot of things I would do besides needing to laugh and feel okay. And I felt okay by making the class laugh and getting attention.
Mhm.
At home, my teeth rotted out because when I was a baby, to make me stop crying, my mom would feed me chocolate milk, strawberry milk, and my teeth ended up rotting out as a baby. So all the going through that pain and trauma. In preschool, the teacher would pull my hair at school. So he would make me cry every
Wow.
time I walked through the front door. So these
So
were
mhm.
there was just so much. My sister, she dropped me on my head in the kitchen, and I remember that was traumatic because like she was my safety
Oof.
net.
Yes.
Yeah, and I remember she had me on her shoulder. I was like always so happy to be with my sister, and she's my big sister, my protector. And then for that to happen was traumatic. Um,
Yes.
and then our house being robbed when I was a baby, and we lived in Paris, and we moved from the jungles in Los Angeles. Our house was robbed by a bunch of men with guns because my dad had a heroin debt and he couldn't pay it. So they came and they took all the furniture out of my mom's new track home. So up until about the age of 10,
That yeah, that's a very like sorry, I didn't mean to say it. Like
yeah,
those are
no,
some
you're fine.
very traumatic experiences. I mean, like
Yeah,
if we compare, not to make comparison of childhood experiences. Like I'm only 1992, right? 1992 when you were born. I was
no,
born in 19.
I was
Oh
born in
no,
88.
you're born in 88. But at that experience at 1992, I was
Yeah.
just born 4 years
Oh, wow.
later,
Yeah.
and your environment, and my environment, not the same at all. Like safe and like relatively put in a good environment, and then there's
Yeah.
you that had all these external pressures on
Yeah.
yourself, your family, like the issues inside, and then obviously the school, and then the environment that you lived in. That's a lot of pressure to put, especially at your
That's
age at 11.
no, agreed. And this doesn't like that's not even touching on the sexual abuse or
Hmm.
physical abuse of being bullied in the neighborhood or
Hmm.
just there was a lot of trauma, and
Hmm.
it came from family and it came from the community.
Yeah, that's those things are just unfathomable, at least to me.
In
And
the 90s, I think in the 90s there was less research into it and
that's
there
also
was more
too true.
emphasis on people just being bad. So there
Yeah.
was just a wholesale consensus that you're bad, therefore you deserve bad things. And
Yeah, it was a
even
narrative.
yeah, and even to this day, there's plenty of children struggling out here in San Diego, in California that
Hmm.
people can't reach and people can't address.
Hmm.
'Cause there's honestly there's a lot of parents that shouldn't be parents, but I can't really judge them. But
Hmm.
it's just
It's
so stressful having like a college education and growing up and having the experiences I've had to
hmm.
know that another child would have to be subjected to that, and that adults that have fully developed frontal lobes and maybe they don't have the proper education, so I couldn't judge them. But to me, they're neglecting their children. They could be labeled a child abuser, but
Hmm.
some of them are professionals, some of them are doctors and teachers, and you know they abuse their kids
It's
on any
the
level. It's just not cool.
yeah, it's how people hide it sometimes. Like sometimes
Yeah,
it's just as obvious, sometimes it's not, and that's the
it could be verbal abuse, like
hmm.
verbally demeaning your child, the way you
Hmm.
punish your child, the way you expose your child to violence. So if you're watching a violent TV show and you expose your child to that, to me that's abuse.
Hmm.
It could be cussing around your child. It could be anything that's you're 0 to 5, and now I think it's 0 to 7, your formative years, exposing your child to unhealthy characteristics that our society in the United States doesn't view as appropriate.
Hmm.
Because some of these behaviors might be appropriate in Europe or like small islands somewhere, but in our society and our culture in the United States, these become abnormal behaviors, thought processes, and then you end up being labeled a criminal in our society, or you get
Hmm.
rejected because you don't fit in. But a
Yeah,
lot
the
of your
fitting
character traits
in,
were like, yeah, well,
the
for me, like stealing, I thought stealing was a norm. That was a cultural norm to me. I didn't see anything wrong with stealing. I didn't understand it.
hmm.
My mom encouraged me to steal growing up. She would have me steal for her. My house was robbed from 0 to infinity and beyond, like
Hmm.
nonstop before I went to jail. So That was cool.
Yeah.
I got Infinity Beyond. I got a Toy Story reference in there. Shout out Toy Story, Woody Buzz.
Woody
Um,
Buzz. Yeah, it's you did
Andy was a
learn
great
those
kid.
things. So when
Yeah.
did you learn that those were wrong? Well, society deems us wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like when did you start realizing, or that aha moment where it's like, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing as a youth, right?
Yes.
Because no, yeah, I agree too. The youths are not inherently bad, right? It's the whatever has shaped them to making some very serious decisions in their life. But at the same time, it's like at some point there's gonna be that turning point. Like how, like when do people know,
Yeah.
or
And
young
some,
youths will figure it out, right? Whether it's really
yeah.
early, really late by other external factors. But in your case, like you said, you didn't know that robbing was wrong, right? So like societal
You,
norm, it's wrong.
you knew it was wrong, but it was a cultural norm.
It's a
Like
cultural norm, yeah. It's a
it was
cultural.
accepted by your peers,
Mhm.
your
Your
family,
family,
or
yeah.
it
But for
was
the law, so when was that
yeah.
point? Like, did you get
The laws that you're not fully educated on, because it's not like the law flies huge billboards through your neighborhood educating you on every penal code. You don't go to elementary school learning the penal code, so
oh,
you're not necessarily aware of all of the laws in place
mhm.
or how they're going to prosecute you. But speaking to your, when is the aha moment?
For you, yeah. When was
I'm
that moment?
I'm going to speak on me, but as an expert, I've seen it happen at different ages. I used to be of the belief that adults couldn't necessarily change. They were kind of set in their ways, but I've had another aha moment as an adult that that's possible as well. But luckily for me, that occurred when I was 15 years old. I was incarcerated in Riverside Juvenile Hall, and the staff that worked there, they came from my same neighborhood and different neighborhoods in Riverside County. Some of them came from LA County, different neighborhoods, some from San Diego. But one of the things they all had in common is that they grew up in similar communities, yet they went to college and they weren't committing crimes. At least they weren't committing, I wouldn't say they weren't committing crimes because I've seen them abuse children in juvenile hall, but they weren't committing, they had a job and were committing crimes. So they were like productive citizens earning an honest wage. They weren't selling drugs, those type of crimes. They weren't robbing houses, those type of crimes. And
Yeah.
seeing that just opened my eyes to, okay, there's a path for me being from my community where I don't have to choose to be like everybody else. I was a huge follower. Peer peer influence has always been huge on me, even to this day as a fully developed adult. Whoever I'm around, a lot of times I'll like mold towards, and I'll be similar to, unless they're like full-fledged against like my ethos, which is hurting people. If somebody's like that, I won't conform. But if you like pizza rolls and I don't like pizza rolls, believe me, I'll be eating pizza rolls with you. So it's just on a more extreme level as a child. I adopted on a lot of the same characteristics
Right.
as the guys. And when I say guys in my neighborhood, a lot of them were adults. I was probably one, yeah, there was one person, Ray, who was 17. Everybody else was over the age of 18 in their 20s and 30s, who were my friends and peers in the community. But yeah, my aha moment, juvenile hall, the juvenile hall staff, seeing that they were from my community, yet they went about it a different way. It
Hmm.
really opened my eyes to the possibilities of me myself being successful outside of what guys in my neighborhood
Are
that were
doing.
on the street and not happily employed were doing.
Hmm. Yeah. I actually wasn't sure if you wanted to go into it, but would you
Yeah,
like to share? Maybe like I said, it's up to your comfort. What brought you into your incarceration in the first place?
no problem. So I was 15 years old. I was 2 months past my 15th birthday, and there was two older Hispanic kids in my neighborhood who I often smoked weed with. We were kind of like, technically on paper, we were rivals because we're from two different community groups, which
Right.
other people would label gangs. I
Mm-hmm.
kicked it with a local African American group of people, and these were two Hispanic kids. And our community is really racist. Like for Hispanics and blacks, do not get along. And this goes from grandmas all the way down to kids in the community. But um, so we had a common bond of smoking weed. We would smoke weed together. They went to burglarize a home. Me and my 17-year-old friend wanted to be a part of their burglary, but we weren't 100% committed. And this was something they were doing. They didn't invite us, they went to do it on their own. So they go to the house and we separate ourselves, but
Mm-hmm.
we choose to come back. We go about a block away, then we choose to come back. We go back to the house and they're at the front door. So we look, and in my opinion, I'm thinking they're sneaking in the house. I didn't think it was going to be a home invasion or somebody would be home. I thought they'd be burglarizing a home when nobody was home. That was
Right.
my
That was the
conviction.
thought.
The 18-year-old kid, the Hispanic kid that was at the front door, he previously burglarized that home and stole a weapon. So I already had that in my mind as well. Like, okay, he's done this before.
So
This
let's
is
be
a
clean.
burglarizing of a
Yeah.
house. Yeah, I didn't equate it to harm being done to anybody. But when they disappeared from the front door, I went back and checked again after the first time they were gone. My initial thought was they snuck in the house. So the backyard was open. So my 17-year-old friend, I'm like, let's go sneak around. Let's see if we could get in the house too. And we go through the backyard. We don't see anybody. It's quiet around the house. We go to the slider. It's locked. I'm getting
Locked.
ready to, yeah,
Just a quick note. We will be talking about some amount of graphic scenes. Probably keep it very brief.
yeah.
Just what happens next. Okay, just heads up. All right, go ahead.
Thank you for the warning for the audience. And so I'm ready to leave at this point, but my 17-year-old friend, he knocks on the sliding glass door and it's kind of loud. So it scares me because now I think, the sneaking is, you're going against our sneaking. Now you're like making neighbors aware that we're here and they can see us and we go to jail. Like, let's not do this. Let's leave. You're not sneaking no more. But I took steps away from him to leave, but he called me back. He was like, hey, they're coming. So I go back to the sliding glass door and the door flies open and the 18-year-old kid grabs me by the front of my shirt. He yanks me in the house and he lifts up the shirt, shows me a weapon. He's yelling at me. He's like, is this what the F you wanted to see? And he points to Mr. Love, who's harmed on his living room floor. And
So he was already hurt,
yeah,
injured already.
yes. And in my mind now, there's a lot to deal with, but one of the most important things I thought, and it was selfish, I had a lack of empathy at that time. So, and this was an example of my lack of empathy. I chose to steal some candy off of the kitchen counter and then flee. Part of the rationale was I couldn't just leave because I didn't want these kids murdering me.
Mm-hmm.
So the rationale was just, grab something, leave, act like everything's still good. But it wasn't still good. When I left, I wrestled with the thought of what was going on with the homeowner. I asked my 17-year-old friend who left with me. We left separate from the kids who committed the main burglary. And I asked him, I said, hey, do you think he's going to get up and call the police on us? He was like, no, man, he's dead. And it was a shock to my mind to hear those words. He's dead. It just didn't, I couldn't make sense of it that somebody would be murdered in that fashion, or he could just be dead just like that. Even though I was in a community where there was shootings and gang violence, the fact that like a homeowner was beaten and just died just out of the blue like that was just so shocking to me. And I didn't want to accept it. I didn't accept it until I was arrested 3 days later, and a detective in the interrogation room told me Mr. Love is
Mm-hmm.
dead. That's when it really sunk in, like, wow. And I remember fighting that same night. I remember fighting with the idea I need to call 911. I need to call 911 because if he's hurt, I can't just let him die. I didn't think he was dead. I wasn't convinced of it, even though Mark was telling me this. But I wasn't able to call 911. It's so sad to think at that age I couldn't rationalize saving somebody's life versus being worried about me getting in trouble. When I went home that night, I remember my mom was in the bath and I just laid directly in her bed. And she gets out and I told her, I'm like, Mom, I seen a burglary today. And she started yelling at me. She was like, what the are you doing around a burglary? You could get in trouble for it. So I remember clamming up and I told myself, okay, nobody else gets to know about this because if my mom responds like that, just imagine how
Imagine
somebody
the law
else is going to
enforcement.
respond.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
You kept
up
it
until the
shut.
yeah, up until the point I was arrested, I didn't know what to do. And I was suffering from PTSD because the next morning I woke up to a loud gunshot and it wasn't real, but it was real to me. But I
Right.
looked around like to see if anybody was shot, shooting at the house. I was just really going through a lot of trauma because I didn't sign up for this and it's something
No.
that happened and I didn't respond appropriately to it in a societal context. But in the context of the gang world and in my community, I was responding the way I was supposed to. My
Yeah.
mom educated me early on. If you see somebody hurt somebody, you never say anything because they'll come kill your family. My neighbors had their door chopped down with a chainsaw for being witnesses. So it was a common knowledge not to inform.
Like,
So I was following my cultural norm of my community, but not law enforcement and legislative norms.
so like save yourself.
Yeah,
type of
because
thing. Yeah.
legislatively, I was responsible for first-degree murder by not, calling law enforcement and by participating in the burglary, and that's what went on that's what happened. When I was arrested, I was ultimately charged and convicted of first-degree murder, which if I was 18, it would have carried the death penalty. If I was 16, it would have carried life without parole. Because I was 15, it carried 25 to life. But for my first year of incarceration, I faced life without parole because the law hadn't been adjusted yet. 16-year-olds could still get death sentences, and this was in 2004, and 14 and 15-year-olds in California could still get life without parole, which I've met several in my time that actually have that sentence.
How'd you feel? Sorry.
Yeah,
Excuse the personal part. Like, how did you feel when the judge gave you that sentence?
I cried. I knew it wasn't fair. I felt strange, and oddly enough to say, I felt a sense of relief. My co-defendant, who was 16, he was sentenced to 2 life without paroles and a 25 to life gun enhancement prior to my sentencing a week before. So the fact that I feel like I only got 25 years to life was a sense of relief because it told me if I go to prison and I do good when I'm 40, I'll get to go to a parole board and ask them to let me come home. I could also come off the highest security level and work my way down to programming type prisons. So there was a sense of relief to my 25 to life, but there was also the thought of they don't know what they're doing. The judge doesn't know. The prosecutors don't know. They don't know that they're hurting somebody who didn't have the ill intention to hurt people and that didn't want to do that.
Yeah, they put you in
They
a
didn't know
box.
me. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I didn't cooperate with them through the process because I wasn't healthy either. I wouldn't have put myself in a position to testify on my peers because that's not
the
my role.
backlash. Yeah,
And not even the backlash, but just our societal structure is not built to help or heal people. It's designed to hurt people. And as a Christian, and I started going to church in 2015, and I mean in 2004 when I was 15 in juvenile hall, I had a moral responsibility not to hurt people. And if I went on to testify against a child and was responsible for him getting sentenced to life without parole, I'm in effect harming this child. And when he goes on to create another victim, I'm responsible for that as well because I didn't participate in his healing. So, as somebody who is a lover of Jesus Christ, there
hmm
was no way for me to promote the current criminal justice system. And I've gone on to develop a passion for reforming the criminal justice system and evolving it into a restorative justice system.
and this was during your time in juvenile hall, right? Like, since you did have to technically go through schooling, and then you
Yeah,
realized that education was that thing, was your lifeline to getting something
education
better.
is huge, most definitely. So I went in with a third grade education. I could barely read, I could barely write. But if you didn't go to school, you were in your cell nearly 24 hours a day. In juvenile hall, you don't have televisions, you don't have radios, you don't have canteen. So you literally go insane in a small cell. And I was in a high security unit for because I was tried as an adult, which meant that I was technically an adult from 2004 forward. As soon as I was arrested, the prosecutor deemed me an adult. So there was no like Disneyland type experience. It was just hardcore, locked in your cell, um, high security punishment. So education became a lifeline to get out of the cell at first, but slowly meeting the teacher and playing sports and dialoguing with the staff just developed
Mhm.
into my love and education and my view that I could do something more with my life
Mhm.
than conform to societal structures that influence negative behaviors.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, but that's good because you'd had to stay in 24 hours a day because you were tried for a violent crime, right?
So being tried as an adult, not necessarily a violent crime, as soon as you're tried as an adult, they move you to the high security unit. And if you
Right.
have a violent crime and you're not tried as an adult, you could also be on the high security unit. But 14 of the 20 kids in group 9, and there's 3 security groups holding 20 people each. But group 9,
Mhm.
14 of us there were all charged with murders.
Right.
So, and a lot of kids didn't do the murders. There was one kid from the east side of Riverside. He had 14 co-defendants for one homicide. So his gang killed somebody and he was held responsible, although he didn't do it.
Yeah. So it's a very, well, at the time, right? Very wide. It's a wide punishment. Anyone who was involved was going to get punished as equally.
Yeah.
Well,
So
it's
like in
steep. It's a
Florida
steep
today,
price. Yeah, it's still a steep
one
price either way.
even in Florida, Florida has one of the cases that stand out the most because a guy let another guy borrow a car to commit a burglary. He said, "I'm gonna commit a burglary." The guy said, "Okay, you can use my car." The guy takes the car and he kills somebody in the house when he does his burglary. And the guy who was in his home the entire time, who just let him borrow the car, is convicted of first degree murder, sentenced to life without parole in Florida. That's an old case. I haven't caught up with it recently to see if he was released, but that's one that always just stuck with me and I could never let it go. That's
Hmm.
outside of my own case, which was highlighted in the New York Times, or Brandon Hyde and the Malibu case, where those kids went to buy marijuana. And one of the kids stabbed somebody. Yet even in that case, I believe there was a kid who never left the car but was sentenced to 25 to life. Those kids are
Yeah,
still. I know one of them still in there for sure with life without parole. His
yeah,
parents are amazing. They helped me in my journey and my family, and sad every time to know that her son's still in there, sentenced to life without parole.
yeah. It's hard to see because, for
Mm,
instance, just like this morning, you followed me on social media, right? Like my Twitter
yes,
account,
I do. Yeah,
right? So then, every now and again, I do see some of those stories, like especially if we're talking about the death penalty, right? It's like, oh,
yes,
this so and so is like 20 something days away from being executed. This is like how you like retweet, bump up the story, get the narrative out. It's like they have been like wrongfully incarcerated, like kind of like you, right? It's like they were a byproduct of the crime. Not byproduct, but it's like you were there at the scene of the crime, but they didn't do anything,
yeah.
whether as they were a bystander or it's they just so happened to be there. And then
And
obviously they get arrested. Mhm.
speaking to that effect, a lot of times when I share my story, it's not a lack of taking responsibility for my actions. I completely take responsibility for my lack of empathy, and I worked through those
You were
16 years.
young. You were
Yeah,
young and scared, and
yeah,
it didn't make it
but I don't,
okay. It's just that
yeah,
you're scared.
and
What would you
we
have done?
yeah, no, most definitely. And what can't get lost in our dialogue about those that are unfairly punished is that those who have actually committed harm, those who have even committed the ultimate offense of murder and rape, um, if you're punishing them on the same level as those who have done lower offenses, and then you're watering down your humanity's judgment of what's right and what's wrong. You're saying murder is bad, but being a part of a burglary where a murder is an accident is worse. Because I have a lot of friends who've killed
Mm.
people and got manslaughter, second degree murders, heat of the passion. People who physically murdered had less time than me and were going home, and they had an easier time than I had. I was a child who didn't kill anybody. So that means when I go to prison, I don't get the gang stripes of I put in work, therefore don't mess with me. I go to prison as somebody who was around a crime. So now my potential to be a victim increases. So not only does the system victimize you, now you're at higher risk by
Oh,
your peers of being victimized.
right.
And also your opportunities to come home are severely reduced because being labeled the worst of the worst, you go to the higher security levels, you have less programming. And then when you have to appear in front of a parole board who determines whether you can come home or not, you can't take responsibility. They want you to say, I know while I'm responsible for Mr. Love's death, and this is why. And, I feel redeemed and I would like to come home now. I'm sorry and it'll never happen again. You can't do that if you didn't physically kill somebody, but you're challenged to do that. Somebody who's physically killed somebody can do 15 years working on themselves and addressing their causative
But
factors
if you
to
never
go to a
done
parole
it,
board and come home. But somebody who hasn't, like your nonviolent third strikers, they face a far difficult time getting out than people who've actually murdered. So just that by itself is a gigantic flaw in the system that people don't bring light to and people aren't educated on. And I'm
yeah,
lucky that I'm out
I
there to give them
definitely
time.
didn't know.
Yeah. And
That's
another thing is that I wanted to speak to differentiating between like violent and non-violent offender is harmful because you're there. There's a lot of guys who are called violent offenders who didn't commit violent offenses. I was a violent offender for 16 years, but I didn't physically commit any violence. So it's a misleading term. It doesn't serve a purpose. It doesn't keep society safe. And also, your person who killed somebody, their punitive cap on punishment, the death penalty is out completely. That's nothing that can be justified in any humane, educated, enlightened society. And you don't you don't kill somebody to show somebody killing something is wrong. And a little girl who was a victim of a murder by her mom in Florida, Kaylee Anthony, just she highlighted it because she was in preschool and she wrote a drawing where she said Um, why do people kill people who kill people to show people that killing people is wrong? And that's a saying that stuck with me throughout my entire incarceration. And that's something we do. And I try to not do that. I don't want to be that hypocritical to the point where if somebody punches me, I don't retaliate by therefore punching them. That's a weak demeanor. Humbleness is actually strength. So I've done this in practice. I've been punched 3 times in prison where my response was to calm the other person down. So it wasn't, I didn't respond with anger because our criminal justice system too, we respond off of emotion versus logic. Because a logical approach is you hit me and I hit you back, I further the risk of harm. And do I enjoy hurting you? No. If you hurt me, does that all of a sudden make me you? No. Like you can't change my character and make me hate people. I love people. So therefore, if you hit me, I have concern for you now. I may be sad, I may be fearful, but mad is not my first emotion. Fear might come up, but still, with fear, I also get the ration and the love and the compassion to know I want you to heal, man or woman. I want you to know that you're loved, and wherever you're hitting me, there's something going on, and I hope you get it addressed, and I hope it's
Mm-hmm.
healed. But that's the approach that our incarceration system should take to people. Like you want society to be safe, but uh, taking the emotional, fear-based, anger-based approach of hurting people doesn't make anybody safer. You create more victims, not
Right.
of that person directly all the time, but their family, and then even the victim of the crime and future victims of that person's crime because you failed to give them the tools necessary to be successful, and you continue to harm them. You don't just continue to slap an angry dog and then let him go run around the community with children walking around. But you would do that to a human being. You would be really punitive to 95% of the individuals who are returning to our society.
Mm-hmm.
No, you treat people as human beings who are our fellow Americans and relatives and loved ones. You feed them good diets, you educate them, and you give them the best chance possible to be successful because when they come home, which 95% are coming home, you want your neighbor to be helpful. You want Shawn Khalifa to help you change your tire on the side of the freeway, and you don't want somebody who is unreformed and angry to hit you over the head with a tire jack and
Mm-hmm.
then
It's
drive
the
off with your car with a flat and get a
mm-hmm.
police chase.
It's that
You know, take it 9. Yeah, go ahead.
I no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No, you're
like
clear. I was running with it.
no,
I'm
no,
like,
no. It's the soapbox. It's like because you're
yeah,
telling something that is very real to you.
yeah,
Obviously, it's like this gets you pumped up or this gets you worked up
uh,
because it's the experience if you lived. Because I was taking a quick look of like the how we talked about 2 weeks ago about labels.
yeah,
Right? So they in I had to actually I had to check my sociology notes actually.
yeah,
Um, the idea of having a master class, the label that you use or the label that is given to you that sticks with you forever or like for a long part of time, and that would be like the title of, we don't use this word anymore, right? Returning citizen is what we want to say, but to someone who came out criminal, right? And
yeah,
having that is like a double punishment. It's like you've already did your time, but when you come out and they don't, like I said, they don't treat you like a human being that you deserve to be treated, uh, as you know, as treated, and you are punished for that at every turn of corner. Like you can't get a job right away. You can't exercise some of your American rights, right? Like the right to vote, or you can't go to
yeah. If you can't
school.
vote, you're not a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
That's a point. That's a point blank argument right there.
Yeah, like stuff like that. Like you get punished for a while, and it could be forever up until you die because of.
Currently, I'm 32 years old. I just was accepted to San Diego State University. I'm happily employed, 2 jobs, and I'm on parole. So something that happened when I was 15 years old
Doesn't
that
mean that, yeah, it's not
it's
permanent anymore.
but it's still a part of my life.
Yeah, true.
It's been 17 years, but I still have a conviction, a felony on my record, and I'm on parole, going to college, and
Oop, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
and just doing as much as I can to function in society. So, but there's no reason for me. You can, I mean, there's no reason for me to be on parole. I mean,
That's you, yeah.
I did freaking 17 years. I'm just saying, like, the
You did your time for
what
something
is
you
the
didn't
logic
do.
of keeping somebody on parole who is 15 years old, who was sentenced to life, who you changed your mind and said, okay, you're not a murderer anymore, you can come home. You don't get an apology. Instead, you just get on parole. But my parole officer doesn't talk to me. I can't even check in with my parole officer if I wanted to. I could call my parole officer, they won't even respond. I haven't seen my parole officer in 3 months, so I don't even know if I'm still on parole. I just know that I'm still on parole until February. But
How long are
like,
you supposed to be on parole, actually?
it's a 3-year parole, and they're gonna make me do a 2-year parole, which these are, mind you, these are taxpayer dollars that could be better spent on my education. I mean, I have to pay my own rent, and I have to go to SDSU, and I have to work my butt off with 2 jobs to function. And I mean, that parole money could go towards my education, or it
Uh,
could go to somebody else's education,
question.
or it could go to, yeah, please.
Question. Like, were there any conditions for your parole? Like I
Yeah,
said, I
the
barely
one
know enough about the criminal.
the most damaging condition was that I couldn't parole to my mother's house. So
Mm,
I was arrested at
basically
the age of
separating.
15 as a child out of Riverside County. And of course, I've been gone nearly 2 decades. All of my family left. I have no connections to Riverside. But my conditions forced me to parole to Riverside County homeless, which parole forced me to be homeless. And I leave as a 15-year-old child, and then you return me as an adult and say I could come back, but you don't, you know, my support's in Orange County. But the condition was based on the fact that Mr. Love's family lives within 30 miles of my mom's house in Orange County. So they said
Right.
therefore I couldn't live there. But at the end of the day, that's a harm condition that
You needed to
how are you just comfortable with taking a child out of society and convicting him of a murder he didn't commit, then returning him and
back in
saying,
that
all right, just be
place.
homeless now. Yeah, and go
Yeah.
back to your old community, which harmed you so severely. When I've built up an amazing support network in San Diego and I have family support in Orange County. You didn't even give me those 2 options, but luckily
How'd you get out of it?
my support network was so strong in San Diego that I was able to secure housing, and parole agreed to let me transfer to San Diego. So if it wasn't for the work I did at San Diego's local state prison, RJ Donovan Correctional Facility, I did
Right.
a lot of hard work there I was a productive member of San Diego for the past 3 years. I've been living in San Diego since 2017,
Right.
although I was in Donovan State Prison.
Mm-hmm.
I was here. I was in our community having an impact. They were
Mm-hmm.
performing my plays in the community. I was organizing large fairs where we got volunteers to come in. So I was doing my part. And that just developed into a network to where I had a safety net in this county. I built up basically who is my new family just by being there and being productive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what saved me is just hard work. If I would have never transferred to San Diego's local prison, support your local prison, by the way, if you're listening. Shout out.
Yeah.
Everybody should have. Yeah, volunteer. I would have been can I say it like Chits? I would have been up Chits Creek. So like we'll just spell it CHITS or
Got you. No,
SCH.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I
It
got
would have
you.
been it would have been bad, Jen. It would have been bad. Like
Mm-hmm.
just imagine, like, hold on, let me go on one real quick. I'm feeling this. So just imagine I would have been paroled back to Riverside and I wouldn't have had no support. I would have been hurting. I would have been hungry. I would have been homeless. And what's the likelihood that I would have went down to the local McDonald's and slapped somebody and took a cheeseburger and be like, I need to eat because I'm hungry. Like I have no housing. Like I need help. I would have been like F the police. I would have been like F parole. I would have been like, what is wrong with you guys? Like I went from 15 to 31 in an institution and I was comfortable. Send me back. I want my TV back. I want my food back. I want my points back. I had worked off like 50 points to go to a low security unit. So, Jan, what about that, Jan? That would have been reality had we not put in work for ourselves. And just think about this. Our taxpayer dollars don't fund the work I put in. Our taxpayer dollars don't fund the work the volunteers put in to have
Mm-hmm.
this success case. We fund parole and we fund correctional officers, we fund police officers who only promote the harm and abuse, which it's not all of them have the intention, but legislatively, these policies are already in place. And when their new head sheriff comes in, the new head district attorney comes in,
Mm-hmm.
they don't reform these policies. They just continue the policies of the past that have contributed to so much harm. And you'll see, just like in Los Angeles County, I believe you got Gascon going in there. Shout out Gascon. So he went in there and he's doing genuine changes in his district attorney's office. And even Summer Stephens in San Diego County is in an uproar because they're so comfortable with their harm system that they've created because it's provided their livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
Sad to say it, a lot of correctional officers would go be employed by the cartels if they weren't employed by CDCR. Half of the correctional officers abuse their positions of power. I lived there for 16 years. They formed a gang. It's called The Green Wall by DJ Bodeca. Shout out, read that book. It'll inform you on a prison correctional officer gang. We all know about the LA sheriffs having their own gang, but they traffic in drugs, they murder people. And when they commit murder, you would never know because what you read in the press release that they control all the information is
True.
that somebody made a threatening motion towards them. And when you have somebody convicted of first degree murder in prison who makes a threatening motion towards a correctional officer, the murder is obviously justified. And they say they resisted arrest. But in actuality, since I was there, they open the door, they get in an argument. Hey man, put your tray through the slot. I'm not done eating yet. I'm not putting my tray through the slot. F you. F you. Open the door. They go in the door, they beat the guy to death, and then they said he made a threatening motion at him. So that's how your staff assaults and your murders occur in prison. But you guys would never see this or know this because they don't wear body cameras yet. Shout out
True.
San Diego mental health in the prison. They have to wear body cameras now. But
Before they
yeah,
didn't. Right.
yeah, for real, they didn't. Yeah, Jen.
Mhm.
You got me fired up. I feel like Tan Tran from First Watch. Shout out.
No,
Yeah.
no, because
Like,
like you said, that those are
yeah.
the things that we would never see unless it gets exposed in some way, like a camera leak happened
Yeah.
or an inquiry goes in and then it's exposed and we
Yeah.
react as a public and we're like, oh,
Yeah.
we need reform. You got the
And
reform.
facts. The articles get published, but they don't get promoted.
Yeah, they don't get
So
promoted.
you'll see 6 prison guards stabbed at RJ Donovan, but
Mhm.
you won't see a restorative justice fair RJ Donovan.
Yeah,
So it's
see,
like you're
that's the thing.
yeah.
It's one or the other.
Like we had a giant 3-day fair that's never occurred in an American prison. We had a 3-day restorative justice fair side of a high security prison, but they had a riot that same Friday. All the media covered was the riot and didn't know would show up to our restorative justice fair. Such a huge, great accomplishment that shows restorative justice and preached to that. It was in the name of the fair, restorative justice fair. And you could Google it, Google up restorative justice fair RJ Donovan, and you'll see reporting on it. I was able to write an article on it. San Quentin News covered it. I mean, our media outlets covered it, but NBC didn't cover it. ABC
Nope.
didn't cover it. They
Nope.
covered the riots. Good
Yeah.
Lord. Good Lord. Get a grip.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
No, it's okay. I could see it because
yeah.
it gets you pumped up because, like you said, it's
Like,
crying out to like we've mentioned this before. Like you could have preached this to like already to a group that already knows what that feels like, but to someone like our audience who may not know or
yeah,
who've never been experienced. So this is jarring for me because, like you said, they decided to focus on riots instead of something that is positive. But it's
uh,
clickbait. Clickbait.
yeah, yeah,
Get
yeah,
the sensation out there when it's like, well, what about the flip side? Like, not everything in the
yeah.
news is upsetting, and it doesn't have to be, right?
One of the most notorious cases on this that
Mhm.
I've experienced is the Menendez brothers.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks of the Menendez brothers like Charles Manson, but you've never met the Menendez brothers. Like, why don't you go to RJ Donovan and visit the Menendez brothers and talk to them yourself? All of
Mhm.
a sudden, you'll find a new best friend. They lead yoga class. They led the mural project on the yard. These dudes
Showed
are
me,
like,
you showed me that too.
yeah, they're with the business when it comes to humanity and compassion. They were children who came from an abusive environment. And unfortunately, I believe if the older brother did murder his parents, that's unfortunate. And is really tragic and it happened. But we're talking, was it 3 or 4 decades later? You can't continue to demonize new human beings who not only reform themselves, but they give back and they're putting in work for San Diego. They're down there at Donovan, like really building the community. They helped out in the no violence challenge where they got 200 guys to line up in the middle of the yard and spell out no violence and hold up candles. Like, who does that? We don't do that, but your Menendez brothers do that. But you don't even hear that in the media. You usually hear about their case and you hear the harm labels that are still placed upon them as
Right.
evil.
Mhm.
These
Mhm.
dudes aren't evil. Like these dudes
Mhm.
are people that want to live a comfortable life. And could you just imagine going from being an abused child to, for whatever reason, you murder your parents? How do you survive and not commit suicide after? Like, how do you fight that battle and try to redeem yourself? That's something you got to give these guys as well. To try to even Susan Atkins and the Manson followers, like you've seen them try to redeem the human spirit to change your life and redeem yourself after doing something so horrible is it has to be admired because just that spirit, we don't all possess it. A lot of us would have killed ourselves, given up. And of course, you could take the easy way out and say, I wouldn't have done it in the first place. But at the end of the day, we don't know what we would have done given any situation we would have been in. What would
Like
you
in your
do?
point.
Yeah, what would you do if you were kidnapped and you were locked in a room and chained to a bed? And then you're there for a month, and then the person doesn't want to feed you. But then all of a sudden your chains become loose and you get a knife. And you can escape, but you have to stab this person. I mean, irrationally, you might stab them. So you take that same approach. Imagine you're a child and you're abused by your parents for 17 years, and you don't know how to express it. No one's ever trained you on how to express this. I'm not justifying their behavior. I'm just showing that we're all human and humans make mistakes, but that in no way should define you for the rest of your life. I would never define the Menendez brothers by killing their parents because they've developed into some genuine, decent human beings. Like it's crazy to say and to argue and to speak about because you guys don't know those guys. Like I know those guys. I lived with them for 2 years. So like I got to know them on that facility. I work with them on different projects and they're human beings. They're just like everybody else. And I swear, if you go and visit them, you would trip out. You'd be like, you'd probably be embarrassed that you ran with the media Hollywood story that they're evil. Because that's what sells though. Like
It's
you
it's
create
the selling point.
notorious criminals, yeah. But human beings aren't like that. I mean, human beings change every 10 years, every 5 years. Like Jan, in 5 years, you're going to be a completely different podcaster. You're going to mature, you're going to age, you're going to grow
Yeah,
up.
no,
So,
absolutely. Like I think that's what people forget. Or like they say like you'll never be the same person as you were at, like I said, 5, right? 5,
yeah,
10, 15, 25, right? Like the person I am now is not the person I was last year or the person last year. Maybe some habits have changed, maybe some have stayed the same, but it's not that's not the thing. And like you said, like with labels and stuff, like that's how I try to treat others now. If they did something in their lives, I try my best not to keep to that standard. Only because it's just things are transient. There's a lot of
yeah,
changes that could go, whether that'll take
100.
2 years, 2 months, or 20.
It's
But
going to differ, but we're humans, and it's in our nature to evolve and change. And Jan, I would like to challenge you. So, when,
jeez.
when you were 15 years old, what was the worst thing you did at the age of 15 that you're like the most ashamed of?
How old was I? 15, sophomore year. What did I even do in sophomore
Did
year?
you dump somebody's head in the toilet? Did you? Did
No,
you?
I was not in that. I don't think I was a bully, but if
Did
anything,
you
it's
cheat?
like
Did you slap somebody?
I
No?
know. In my household, it's more of like you what did we do? Like probably sneaking out, like
You
sneaking
snuck
out.
out.
Yeah, like snuck out, snuck back in. Parents didn't know. Sorry.
Okay. So you snuck out. So your parents had a law of the household that you couldn't sneak out and you snuck out. So I was at 15. Imagine the rest of your life you were known as a sneaker outer. So when you go on to get married, your husband judges you as a sneaker outer. So
Mm-hmm.
he has to worry about you sneaking out. You might go out to dinner, but all of
Mm-hmm.
a sudden society knows that you might sneak out. So even though you don't have a history of not paying your bill, that might be on their mind. Jan's not going to pay her bill because she's known as a sneaker outer. So then
Yeah,
you can't even eat at that restaurant.
and I can't eat
So
at
just
any
imagine
restaurant. Yeah,
imagine the discrimination of being defined by the worst thing you ever did for the rest of your life as a human being. Wouldn't you feel like an outcast? And then
that.
imagine
Mhm.
imagine you had the audacity to fight to redeem yourself. Couldn't we all respect that? I would respect the heck out of a Jen who fought to remove that label, who went on to reform and advocate and speak to people and say, I don't sneak out anymore. You know, I did that at 15, but I've completely changed that behavior. This is what I learned. And now I just want to keep other people from sneaking out at 15 because I would hate for them to be labeled the same in society.
Mhm.
So now you have over 200, not over 200, you have over 2 million Americans incarcerated throughout the United States. And over half of those Americans don't, they're all labeled by what they did, but over half of them, believe me, have a deep passion and don't want to be labeled as that. They don't take it as a badge
Mhm.
of honor or pride. They want to overcome it. But just imagine this goes on to last the rest of their lives.
I would, I would go. Honestly, I would go mad trying to fight something like that. Like even if it's something, well, yeah, even if it's something like that, I would definitely want to try to fight that, even if it killed me, because it's just
Yeah.
why would I want that for the rest of my life? It's just like if you pick your nose and you're divided by a nose picker for the rest of your life, your 10-year high school reunion, your 20, your 10-year college reunion. It's like, oh, that's the person that
Yeah.
people knows. It's just like, no, I don't do that anymore. I do something
Yeah.
meaningful with my life. That would probably be the most
I've grown up. Yeah. I've
humanizing thing, which
matured.
is, it's a
Yeah.
trope in media. It's a trope, here, but it's not like you're clearly a clear example of what it means to change as a human being. Like the crime that you were a part of, terrible, absolutely, but you're not that person anymore. Like you got, not to like strain out, that sounds so bad to say, it's just it like something inside and the experiences that you had didn't make you stay that person anymore. So like if you saw someone hurt now,
Oh,
you
I'm
would
there.
most definitely you'd
Yeah.
probably be the first one right then and there calling 911,
Yeah.
potentially saving their life.
That
So
goes from saving people's lives in prison. I saved somebody who hung themselves from the stairs. I ran over there and saved him. Same thing I would do out here in the community. I see somebody
mm-hmm,
shoot somebody, I'm running to that person who was shot to help them.
mm-hmm.
So
These,
yeah,
yeah,
it's just if God blessed me with the ability to help people, then that's the journey I have to take is be a helper. If
yeah,
you have the physical capability to help, then help.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's because it's at even at your age, like
You mean being
it,
old?
when you were younger at 15, like
Yeah.
what, like if I thought sneaking out at 15 to just go to a friend's house was probably the worst thing that I could have done, it's just like if 15 me met 15 you, that like flip side, like what would I have done that could have been any better? Like could I have called somebody? You never
Yeah.
know. And it's like that 2020 hindsight. It's like even if you could have changed it, right? It's like would that part of your life still continue being part of a community that is or surrounded by gangs or surrounded by violence and drug use and all of that really pretty crappy stuff? It's
Yeah.
like would your life still end up the way that it is now?
Not at all. So that's one of the hugest gifts is that um I mean, low key, I manifested to my incarceration because even as a child, my friend across the street, his dad was in prison too. So we used to always joke as children, like, hey, what are we gonna do when we go to prison? Hey, we need to practice and get ready for prison. We need to be tough. So we low key manifested ourselves to go to prison one day. I didn't know I would manifest life in prison. I literally, my dad been to prison like 12 times, and I served more time than he ever did in one stint in juvenile hall. Like I did 3 years in juvenile hall, which was basically prison time. He's only done like probably a year and a little over
Mhm.
at most. So I didn't think it'd be that extreme, my punishment. But at the end of the day, it was a blessing because it was going to come regardless. And it saved me from getting murdered. The same day that the offense happened, I was set to be murdered. My co-defendant was going to shoot me, but he ran out of bullets. So that's the only reason why I survived.
Yeah, that's
God is good. Like I survived, a tragedy occurred, but it's not like roses didn't come from it. There's positivity that comes from it, and it's a challenge. We never know when it's our time to go because when God takes somebody and when He takes good people, it's time. So those of us that are still here, we might not have reached our potential yet because you might reach that good potential to where you're like genuinely in the good space, and that's your time to go. And that's my explanation for why God takes good people or even innocent people because it's time. They're at that point where they're good. God got them. And then
mhm.
those of us that are still struggling here, and we're not like really, we're not on par to like just be in God's grace and go to heaven right now.
Mhm.
We're still kind of on timeout on the earth while we work to attain that level of
Mhm.
humility and humbleness and Christ-like
Mhm.
ability.
Yeah. It's just it's it's really I don't know. It's kind of like speeches in a way because it's that human spirit, right? The human spirit of needing to cope with to cope with these experiences. The fact that you came out of that, not say like level-minded and sane because all it sounds really bad out of context. It's just uh what you're doing
Right.
now,
Right.
restorative
Good.
justice,
Shawn,
whether you're doing it, I know from like the willfulness of your heart, it's you don't want to see people in this system anymore, and you're always fighting for that change. I know that you're busy, you're a busy guy, going
uh,
into speak your truth, speak to other people's truth. Like you've reached out to people who had similar cases to you. So that speaks to, again, that like literally speaks to your character. Because
Exactly.
it's, if I didn't humanize you in the way that I do now, it's just like what good, like what good would it do? Like
Yeah.
you probably feel strong and convicted in your values, but then sometimes at the end of the night your thought lingers like, am I really just that piece of, blank that I was at 15? So
Yeah,
it's
so
just
that was a worse struggle in prison though. Like when you're actually in there and you're still being punished for it. I'm still being punished for it today, but I mean like physically being confined and out of society, that thought came up kind of every day, like,
mhm,
wow, that's my legacy. So there was even a bigger fight to overcome that. Being
mhm,
out here, I'm lucky I don't have to face that as much. But one of the things I hold on to and why I celebrate every day, like it's the first day and like every day I'm a tourist, is because when I was in there, I always wanted somebody like me out here. So I just want to be out here what I wanted. I want other guys in there to have a voice. I want their stories to be told because that's what I wanted and what I needed and what we need. We need people who were in there, who felt that pain, who lived it, who always wanted this because that's part of the reason why I'm out. If I manifested my release in any kind of way, it was only to be out here speaking up for myself as if I was still in there.
mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
technically my spirit will be in there the rest of my life. I've been in those cells with no clothes though, like when it was cold, like literally naked, no clothes, cold, in
Mhm,
a dungeon on the bottom of a building where a nurse will come by and knock on your window every hour for 24 hours, a little bit of food, lonely, like there's extreme pain that comes with that that keeps you from killing yourself. You have to fight that battle. And to
mhm.
ever be there, you'll always be there. So I'm technically always will be in that cell, in that room, just waiting on a blessing to come. So the fact that I'm out here in a blessing is it's a dream, and I'll continue to speak for myself and advocate because there's
Yeah.
other people in there that are crying, like grown men, and it's just sad. It's sad, and
Mhm.
it's not like it's an easy solution,
No.
but I know what's not the solution is doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. What's
That's not the
that?
solution.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, what's that thing that Einstein said? Like, what the maddest thing you could do is try to solve the same problem 60
yeah.
billion ways, right? When there could just be,
That's the definition of insanity.
yeah, the definition of sanity. Like,
True.
try
Yeah.
something else, make a new formula to try to make it work because it's clearly not working.
Mm.
And the few that came out who are air quote redeemable by society, it gets brushed under the media over other BS that comes with
Oh
it.
yeah, like you'll have as far as the lifer population, we probably have over a 90% uh, success rate where we don't recidivize. So that means like, and that's the population who they don't want to let come home. So you'll hear in media all the arguments by law enforcement and district attorneys that your lifer population, your violent offenders are your dangerous population and the risk to society. But it's your low-term offenders who haven't had that level of training yet that come into the community and commit the most crimes. When I go out in public, I'm not in fear of somebody who's been down 30 years I'm on a trolley with. They're the people I want around me. It's the guy that's only been down a year, 2 years, who's high on drugs that I worry about assaulting me or mugging me. So the people that we need to be releasing from our incarceration system is the majority. There's over 20,000 third strikers in California who didn't commit murders, but they're being punished as if they murdered somebody.
Hmm.
And that makes no sense. Like that is one of my biggest pet peeves is
Hmm.
third strikers.
Quick question, because like I
Yes.
was like, I'm not that well versed in my law,
Yeah.
in my technical law. So are we still citizens, right, of California? Are we still bound to the three strikes rule?
We still have the three strikes law, yes. It hasn't been repealed yet. They've
Yeah.
modified it, but those are weak modifications that
Hmm.
don't really help or apply to everybody. So
So if I
the
shoplift
goal
three
is that
times and I get caught, straight to jail
your shoplifting offense probably won't get you a life sentence nowadays. But
nowadays.
if one of those offenses might have been armed robbery, that might lead you to be deemed a violent offender. And if you had one violent and then two nonviolent, you might be eligible for your third strike. But it depends on what county you're in, who your prosecutor is,
Right.
because it differs on what their policies are.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately it's still in place. So for those guys who have three armed robberies, then they can still get 25 years to life.
25 years to life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that,
Which is a murder term. So it's like if you don't differentiate between punishment for someone who commits murder and someone who commits robbery, even if it's multiple times, you're failing as a criminal justice system.
It's the language. The language is
Yeah.
also a problem, and it's
And
hmm
Jan, think about the children, Jan. These fathers and these mothers
hmm
have children. So when they go away for 25 years to life, that child grows up without a parent. I grew up without a parent. I wouldn't want that for anybody.
yeah,
So these
justice and
children,
these are the justice impacted people as well,
yes, they're
right?
system impacted. Yeah, these children are system impacted. And the financial loss. So all of a sudden there was homelessness.
Yeah,
They lose that
yeah,
financial security, whether they were
absolutely.
working, even if they were paying for their children by doing robberies to fund their children. You still have financial loss. So
Yeah,
I
you
mean, I'm not
experienced
justifying their
that.
robberies, but
Yeah.
well, in my case, I experienced just loss completely. So I only had my mother and my sister. Of course, my father was in and out of my life. I had an older grandmother, but when I was incarcerated, I lost my family. Like those bonds and relationships, my mother still supported me all the way through and visited me every chance she could. But
But it's
as a
still not
mother,
the same, yeah.
yeah, as a mother who had me older, she's in her 70s now. She was growing elderly and getting sick, heart disease, diabetes, and she didn't pass away on me, but that was always a huge concern. Like once that was gone, I become irrelevant to everybody. I don't have loved ones. I don't have friends because part of the having friends were I disconnected from the associates I had who I called friends prior. So that means I went down to 0 friends. And then my family suffered. I lost my father. He passed away, even if we could have redeemed that relationship. My grandmother passed away, one of the few people that I had that familial love with. So
That was
my
hard,
mom
yeah.
was, yeah, my mom's, she's still there. So that's beautiful. But the strain it puts on a mother, like I'm her only son, and I was kidnapped from in front of her eyes. And then how does she rationalize it? How does she cope with it?
Mhm.
She just became a huge advocate for other mothers and built
Mhm.
a lot of connections. She's ultimately the reason I'm home. Just think about this. If I didn't have a mother, I would have never been in the New York Times. My case would have never got media exposure, which means the judge in the California Supreme Court may have overlooked my case like they did the first time around before I had media coverage.
Right.
And I would still be convicted of first degree murder and in prison today because the courts ruled I was a major participant who acted with reckless indifference to human life. And with that ruling, you can still be in prison for a murder you didn't commit.
Mhm.
So technically, I'm only out here because of my mom.
Yeah. I'm glad that you had that support stuff because
Hmm.
if you didn't have that, like you said, that the lack of compassion, the lack of relationships being locked away for so long, how would anybody, like, it's like quite literally the
Hmm.
hypothetical situation, like how would anybody cope with
Yeah,
stuff like that? So
and a lot of people cope. They're hurt. They're hurt. So they make
they're
it, but
they're
I
hurting
have
from
so
it.
many friends in there who don't have relationships. They don't get visits. They don't get packages, and everybody wants them to do good and successful. And
It's
I've seen humans struggle. I've looked these men in the eyes and saw their determination to be okay, yet they're suffering from poverty while incarcerated. Poverty and homelessness while incarcerated is a real thing.
mhm.
So there's guys who don't have support. They can't afford hygiene. They can't afford food. So they have to beg for stuff. There's guys that are literally the same way you'll see somebody stand on the side of the freeway asking for soups. You'll have a guy in the chow hall collecting people's trays, dirty trays that they're going to throw away, or asking for soups, begging for soups, going door to door, begging for hygiene supplies because the state doesn't provide it. Even though it's funded, you don't get the proper supplies. You'll go 1 bar of soap every 2 weeks, and this soap has to wash your clothes, it has to wash you, your hair. It's not tangible. So
No,
yes,
it's
I'm
I
at
know.
fault.
No, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Like that, the throw in the towels. Like, man, I'm tired. Like, tired of the quite literal BS that you had to go through, and you
Because it's
can
so
see it. Yeah,
clear.
it's clear
Yeah,
you. It's
it's
clear to
not
you
fair
more.
that I can see it. I just want to make sure I articulate it well enough so that everybody can see it. Your entire audience can see this and view it
Hmm.
and get concerned and sign up to volunteer at your local state prison. Reach out to a community org that goes in and volunteer. They need you in there. You would love everybody you meet inside of the institution. You're gonna love them. I've never met anybody who's went inside of San Diego's local state prison and came out saying they regretted it. A lot of people said it was life changing, transformational. You got people that beg to go into the prison and meet these individuals.
Hmm.
I
Because
mean, yeah,
they're not the same from whenever they've came in, and if they've been there for a long time, I honestly would expect them to be not the same person, especially if they went from teens to adults
oh
in a
yeah,
span of like 20 years.
a
Like
huge,
you've matured
yeah,
quickly, tragically. But
And that's the majority. So the majority is like that. The majority aren't big, scary people threatening everybody. That's rare. That's
it's
really rare. The majority of your incarcerated population are humble people trying to make it, and it's hard for them. But
mhm.
they're friendly, they're nice, and they got big, bright smiles. Go check them out.
Please, if there's a news company ever listening to this, please, please,
Yeah.
please
And they got you could
think
become a
about the
pen
stories
pal.
that you're sending out, the messages,
Oh
the
yeah,
fear mongering, all that
yeah.
stuff. It's like if it's not the people, like yes, focus on the person who commits the crime of the day, but don't
Yeah.
forget that there is still people trying to come home because they can
So
be productive members.
Jen, I hate to do this to you, but we're gonna have to find a way to wrap this up. No, just
Ah,
I'm
dang.
looking out for you. I got your back. Point
Hey,
blank, period.
point blank and period. No, but honestly, thank you for cramming, because I know that like
We're just
cramming
fulfilling our destiny. Yeah.
fulfilling our destiny using our slogan name like that. No, but
Yeah.
honestly, I appreciate you giving the time to share your story, share your truths. Like you had a couple rants there, but honestly, those are things that our viewers or people around us really need to realize.
I love it.
People
Yeah.
like you, because
I don't get to rant, so like I'm usually cognizant and aware of it. So it's fun that I was able to get in there and do that. I deserve it. I've earned my rants. I've put in work for these rants.
yeah, I mean it's an open platform too. You don't have to kiss up to the lawyers or anything. Anybody who's like trying to pick at your arguments, like, oh wait, but what about this? And I was like, no,
Oh, but I love it though. Like
that's
I desire dialogue because that's what's healthy. That's what I need. If I don't have dialogue about it and no one questions what I say, we're not going anywhere. Because at the end of the day, you're probably not even listening.
mm.
It's just white noise, like
It's like, did I not answer no questions?
yeah.
No, it's okay. But that's like I said, if you would like to consider working for your not working volunteering for your safe prison to work in a restorative justice project with anybody, please check them out and check out the legacy now, because your legacy is not that place at 15. Your legacy now is that you're educating, you're advocating, and you're changing lives for people who are justice impacted and for those who are in still currently in the system and out of the system at the time. So
Yep.
thank you, Shawn, for
You're welcome.
spending that time. And
Just wanted to give SDSU a shout out. Go Aztecs.
go Aztecs, alumni and current students. So at some point when you do graduate, send me an invite. I would love to join, whether if it's
That'd be beautiful.
virtual
No, I'll invite
or,
you.
or in
Better not
person.
be virtual in 2 years. That means that we done gone through some tragedies. Yeah.
Yo, I don't
Like that.
know. We don't know what's gonna happen in 2 years,
don't.
but I
Might be
really
a new one. There could be new pandemics.
can we how about
They're
that?
like
Like you see
we
this
might call them pandemics because they might be planned out.
yeah, plan, but you hear this? Knock on wood that nothing has happened,
Right.
and then when we come out the other side, we'll still be here. I'm gonna give you a hug one day at some point. It's
Thanks,
gonna
I'll take it.
be knock on wood.
Real human being stuff. That's
Mhm.
another thing. There's a lack of hugs inside. There's like you can go 25 years wanting a hug and not getting a hug. Could you just imagine not being hugged in 25 years? So I would love it if there's a hugging org that would like to volunteer and go in and just give out hugs. Just go into the prison and hug people. That's so therapeutic. You need hugs from babies on up. Like that's a natural part of being a human being is to receive hugs. So
Mhm.
if you haven't hugged anybody today, like your audience, not just you, Jen, but your audience, please, I encourage you to go out and hug somebody. If it's your loved one, your relatives, and I know it's COVID going on, so that's probably poor advice, but I mean, just be a gangster and hug somebody and take a shower afterwards. Just don't breathe. Just hold your breath and hug them so that you don't spread COVID. We need hugs, like we need hugs, facts.
Give a hug
Yeah.
if you're able to and within your means
If
too.
you live in the same household,
If
it's
you live in the
okay.
same household, there it is.
Yeah.
There's the kicker. But for now, we will have to deal with just virtual hug for now. So
Yeah.
thank you, Shawn.
You're
For
welcome.
I'm gonna steal you away for a quick 5 minute chat, and then but overall, thank you for spending all of our viewers. Thank you for spending the time to listen to Shawn's big truths in life and in his experience. So I hope you take away something from that. And as always, from the tenets of compassion, care, commitment, and community. This is a community that needs a little TLC. So I'm glad I got to sit with some of that. So from me to you, it's morning now, but if it's morning, good morning. If it's good night, good night. I will see you all for the next episode. Peace, everybody. There we go. Bye.